In your book, Poems and Psalms, you wrote about Shams of Tabriz.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about the circumstances of your first meeting?
Yes, I can.
It was probably in Lincoln Park.
Yes, it was.
On the bench, because you loved that.
Was.
Was it early morning or late at night?
I'll tell you.
Okay.
About 1980 or so, I became dissatisfied with the poems I had written. They didn't quite seem the real thing to me. I didn't know why, but I just thought I should shut up for a while and just be quiet. So for about a year, I didn't write poetry. I read Thoreau's Walden, and I taught my students, and I tried to help my son in school and stuff, you know. I tried to be happy with my wife. But I didn't write. And I felt like a veteran from Waterloo, as I said. I felt like an arm had been taken off, or a leg, you know. And I felt, well, just do it. Just shut up. Robert Bly came here, he was giving a reading at Mundelein, I think. And he came in for dinner one night, and Robert brought me this book that he had translated with a friend of his named Coleman Barks from Tennessee. It's a neat name, isn't it? Coleman Barks. Yeah. It was translations of the Persian poet Rumi. I'd never heard of Rumi. He was about the old 13th century or something. And Robert gave it to me as a present. And I read him, and he was terrific. Coleman Barks' introduction told me about his teacher, whose name was Shams of Tabriz. The story goes like this. Rumi was a court poet. His father and his father and his father and his father had been distinguished people in the Islamic world. A jurist and a priest and scholar and so on. Rumi himself was a scholar. At the age of 35, Rumi had a group of disciples, and he wrote kind of New Yorker poems. And everything was nice. He had a family, was married and all that. Out of the desert came this guy named Shams of Tabriz. Shams, he was like a Christ figure. All he owned was one dirty black cloak. He came out of the desert from this little town called Tabriz. And he began talking with Rumi. He transfixed him. It was like Christ coming to talk with Matthew. Leave what you're doing and follow me. Or when Christ talked with Peter, I will now make you a fisher of men. They became great buddies. They used to disappear for weeks in the mountains and talk. Shams may have been illiterate as far as we know. He never wrote anything, like Christ and Socrates. They talked. It was his teacher. Rumi's disciples got jealous, and they arranged that Shams would be exiled to Damascus. We don't know the details, but he was kicked out of this town to Damascus. 2 years passed, and Rumi couldn't stand it, so he sent for Shams. And Shams came back. On the road from Damascus, he was assassinated by Rumi's disciples. They stabbed him to death. Shams was dying, and he said, everything is God, you are God. They passed out, according to legend. Oh, it's too much. When they woke up, there was only the old black cloak and some drops of blood. Shams had disappeared. That's the legend. Rumi then became a great poet. He became an ecstatic poet. He danced around the temples and the mosque and stuff. Whoops. He became a great poet. His first book was called The Collected Poems of Shams of Tabriz. Dig that. He was like the saints of my childhood, like say, Philip Neri and Francis, and I thought, my God, I understand him. He's like my brother. Not my real brother, but like another brother. And I thought, my God, he's my man. So I took a bike ride in the park. I sat down on a bench near the lagoon, near the farm in the park. I was just sitting there, smoking a pipe, just like Huckleberry Finn. Like with Nigger Jim. And suddenly I started talking to Shams in my head. And poems began again. I took a bike around, and I'll read you that poem later. It was so, I felt so happy. I thought, my God, I'm writing poetry again.
Well, from that same book, I want to read just a few lines you wrote.
Do read the whole poem.
I always thought that people on Valentine's Day shouldn't go out and buy Valentine's, should buy poetry and lift the lines. And here's what I would lift if I could lift lines from your poetry. You are where I belong.
Oh, yeah.
I hold the moon in my hands. It's yours. And in loving someone other than ourselves, we sometimes can become like deep sea divers coming on a kingdom in ourselves we never thought was there. Your poetry moves gracefully in and out of paintings from Bernini, Turner, Picasso. Later, I'd like you to read from Symphony in White, a poem you wrote after coming out of the National Gallery in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
You had seen...
It's a hard-on poem.
Yes.
Yes, it is. It really is.
A way to describe... Well, she's beautiful.
All American language.
Whistler's Mistress Joe. I'd like you to do that.
One of my students said to me recently, you permit any kind of language. I don't agree with that. I said, well, what's wrong with the language? It's how we feel. He said, well, you talk about hard-ons. I said, well, don't you? When that student, I felt some compassion for him, but I felt loosen up, you know, because it's not a matter of promiscuity or anything. It's just a matter of being a person. He never came back to class.
Woody Allen writes his prose pieces in a tiny hand on a yellow legal pad on his bed, or so his biographer Eric Lax says. Do you write on a legal pad, the back of napkins, on a word processor, or all of the above?
I usually write on ruled paper, but it doesn't really matter. If I may quote St. Thomas Aquinas, I could write on toilet paper.
When things aren't going well in your writing, do you do anything special to get it going again?
I'm glad to be able to say that things always go well with my writing. Times that they haven't, I sometimes try my hand at translating Horace or something from Latin, you know. But the point really is that it's a gift, and you can't force it, and you can't jimmy it. You see, you just have to go with it.